Hi, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Realtor Talk. Today, I've got an old friend of mine, Natasha Jain, on the podcast. Thanks for coming on, Tash. Why don't you firstly introduce yourself to anyone listening or watching and explain who you are?
Sure. Well, hi, Lloyd. Thank you so much for having me on. I am Natasha Jain. I'm originally from the UK, but currently living in Hong Kong, and I've been here for about 3 years. I'm an actor in Hong Kong, predominantly involved in theatre, but also commercials, voiceover, radio presenting, and teaching.
Okay. So yeah, it sounds very interesting. You got fingers in quite a few pies. How do you find living in Hong Kong? And how did you cope with like moving to a foreign country as an expat?
Yeah, good question. Hong Kong is an amazing place. It's an incredibly fast-paced city, but one that tends to continually surprise you. You expect it to be all skyscrapers and flashing lights and luxury malls, but actually there's a much softer side to it. And there's a lot of natural beauty with the beaches and mountains and reservoirs. And there's something for everyone, which I really love about Hong Kong. Having said that, uprooting your life to move abroad is not without its challenges. And when I first moved here, there was definitely an adjustment period in terms of culture, language, food, cockroaches. Oh my God, you never get used to the cockroaches. And whilst you're getting used to all of these things, you're also essentially grieving an old life that doesn't really exist for you anymore. And missing people can be exhausting. So there were definitely some challenges, but despite that, I think moving abroad has been one of the most liberating experiences I've ever had. And it's given me a chance to get to know myself and have opportunities that I would never have had when I was back in London.
Definitely. I think it's something everyone should do. I'm in the same boat as you. I've been living here in Dubai for a long time as an expat, and I can completely relate to what you're saying, Tash, in terms of those kind of changes and difficulties. But I think it helps you to grow as a person. You mentioned stuff like the food and the cockroaches, but what are the main pitfalls and kind of difficulties that you really encountered? What really sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, especially when you're coming to a place where you don't know a lot of people, I think one of the biggest challenges was, making friends and creating a community for yourself. Mm-hmm. Because back at home, this was the first time I'd moved abroad. So back home, the majority of my friends were from school or university or from the workplace. And here you're meeting people with no context, and the only thing you really have in common initially is the fact that you live in Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. So it can be a real challenge to find people that you connect with. And then the next sort of challenge is that even when you do find those people, because it's such a transient place, a lot of people end up moving after a short period of time. So I don't know, you kind of have to really learn to let go quite quickly. And I've definitely found that a challenge. But I try to see the positive in the fact that I have lots of holiday homes all over the place now. So that's definitely one of the silver linings. I'd say another really big challenge, I guess, is this feeling of not having somewhere to call home. And that kind of feeling of belonging. I was surprised at how quickly I disconnected from the UK when I left it. It was quite pleasant in some ways to kind of leave that behind. But when I came here, this didn't quite feel like home. So you're kind of stuck in the middle. And that was definitely, and still is, quite isolating. You feel that you don't sort of belong anywhere. But again, you've got to try and look at the positives. And I'd always been somebody who wanted to be a genuine citizen of the world, global citizen, whatever you want to call it. And that's what this opportunity is. And it isn't going to be without its challenges. So you have to learn to sort of embrace them and accept the fact that it's okay to have several different identities. You don't need to have one very structured identity. It can be very evolving. And I really love that.
Yeah, definitely. And the positives, I feel, definitely outweigh those challenges that you have. And the similarities in Hong Kong are exactly the same as here in Dubai, I'd say. Now you've been there for 3 years. Like I've been in Dubai 10 years, for example. I would still call the UK like where I'm from, but now it is kind of like my home. The only real difference is I don't have like family, you know, 5 minutes away. That's the only difference.
Which can be okay. That can be okay as well,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, it's just a short, plane ride. The world, obviously not at the moment, but it's a short plane ride over to go back home, as you say. Do you feel Hong Kong now? Would you call it your home? Do you feel like you're a proper citizen of Hong Kong?
Hong Kong has been very good to me, so yes, it is home. But like I said, I think London is also my home, and I love having two homes, and that's okay. And as you said, exactly, like, because I don't have family here, that will always be, London will always be home. But I think it would be interesting to see if my family moved away, if I would still have that kind of connection to the UK. And I think that says perhaps a lot more about the people that we love rather than the actual places. Things can always feel familiar, and that's really lovely. But yeah, Hong Kong's my home. I'm happy to say that.
Yeah, I think if we kind of reverse it almost. I have friends like who grew up here, so they grew up in Dubai and their family was here, but then maybe they've moved abroad, and then now that their family who used to live here have also moved abroad, then they don't have that connection to Dubai, and then they no longer come back here. So I think it's a bit of a different place. So even like I said, if my family went out of the UK, then maybe I wouldn't have that connection as well. It would feel more like an alien place after a certain amount of time, and then you're just no longer tied to it anymore. But
absolutely.
Let's see what happens with that. Anyway, we were mentioning the difficulties. How did you manage to cope, apart from finding social clubs and meeting people who are like-minded like you? How did you cope?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and definitely not one that I probably could have answered when I first got here very easily. But now that I've been here for 3 years, I think honestly the answer is time. You just sometimes have to keep going, and there are moments where you will feel incredibly low, and I know I definitely did, but I have to remind myself why I moved out here in the first place. And if that reason still feels valid, then you just kind of have to keep going with it. It's always going to be difficult when you come out of your comfort zone, but the sort of pro to that is that you're on an adventure, and no one said that it was going to be easy, right? And I have to remind myself of that every time I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable. So I think time makes a very big difference. So I think, I know that sounds like a really loose answer, but the truth is that kind of as you go along the process, you find friends, you find connections, you find little places in the new area that you live in that you love, you find a coffee shop that makes you really happy, and you start having a lot more, you find joy in the ordinary because you have to, right? That's the survival technique. But it also makes you feel a lot more grateful for the smaller things. So that's definitely helped me.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think it's just once you start having good memories in a place, and that does take time. You can't always, make that happen. But once you have good memories and a history, that takes that time, then you start to feel that, that connection with the place that you're living in. I know you're also doing some stuff on YouTube as well, like these Tash Talks, which where you make videos and talk to the wider world. Was that kind of a coping mechanism for you as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think with the whole thought process of, being in Hong Kong poses certain challenges, but to be honest, if I was back in the UK, I would also have challenges there. And it was that kind of realization that that's part of life, right? Nothing is always smooth sailing, as it were. And that's why I was inspired to create Tash Talks. I wanted to set up this sort of YouTube channel because I realized that behind closed doors, we were all having personal struggles, but we weren't talking openly about it because we don't promote vulnerability as a strength in our society enough. And also because we're so caught up on social media, and it's a highlight reel, but we never get to see the kind of truth behind it. So I wanted to kind of have real conversations and address some of the things that I had been through, in the hope that others would find relatability in it and know that they weren't alone. And also just to really emphasize the fact that you can have a very wide range of emotions at all times. You can feel equally happy and sad at any given moment. You can feel grateful and disappointed at the exact same moment, and that was okay. And that as humans, we are complex. And I think with social media and technology, whilst it's claiming to connect us, actually it's showing us a very kind of 1D perception. And I just wanted to kind of bust that myth, as it were.
Yeah, and I think definitely over the last few years that's becoming more prevalent. So there's becoming a bit more balance in people talking about the depression, all of these these aspects of society. And I think with more role models or larger figures, more popular figures in the world discussing it as well, it's opened people to have that conversation, and it's not become a sign of weakness, especially I think among men.
It's not. Yeah, definitely. Sorry. Yeah, absolutely not a sign of weakness. It's absolutely a strength. I think there are a lot of leaders across very big businesses who are starting to realize the importance of vulnerability and empathy, and it is a strength. And it's, ironically, it's something that we all possess, and all we're needing to do is kind of talk about our emotions and be forthcoming and articulate about it, which we all have inside of us. And I think if we can learn to use that as a skill, I think it would just be wonderful. I really encourage people to do that.
Yeah, I think people just need to talk and communicate about their problems, and then everyone will be able to get it off their chest and feel much better about themselves. That's it.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the YouTube videos I created about why it was really important to have a good fight with your partner, and I'm definitely a big fan of that. So yeah, communicate all the way.
That's good. I think that's going on a lot at the moment with people in lockdown. So. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about is I know that you've been dealing with POTS for quite a few years personally. Can you just explain what that is to people who might not know, and how you've been coping with that yourself?
Yeah, sure. So POTS is short for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Sounds very fancy. It's not, but it's basically it's a chronic condition that affects your heart rate and blood pressure. So hopefully an ordinary healthy person, when they stand up, they would be able to, their sort of heart rate and blood pressure would adjust to allow them to stand up. Whereas for somebody who has POTS, you would faint. And so that was happening to me. And 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with POTS because I was fainting sort of 10, 12 times a day and was just very, very, very unwell. And it was really hard because I was quite young, and you naturally, kind of have an idea of what your life will look like when you're 25 or 26, and mine changed sort of overnight, and I had to quit my job, and I was bedbound for years, if I'm honest. And it was really difficult, and I made the decision to move to Hong Kong whilst I was really quite unwell. So it wasn't, perhaps the smartest decision looking back, but I also, again, like I said, I really got to learn a lot more about myself. And I think I had the space to accept the fact that I was unwell and that my life wouldn't look like I thought it would, and it wouldn't look like other people, my peers, for example. So there's a lot of good learning in it. Obviously very challenging. Don't wish it upon anyone. It's a challenge every single day. There are never long periods of feeling well, which is really hard, but you make the most of it, and that's all you can do, right? With any of these situations, with any challenge, for anyone dealing with everyone's dealing with a challenge at the moment, right? With COVID, and all you can try and do is try and see the positive in it. And for me, it was about, I got out of the corporate world. I'm now doing something that I absolutely love. I don't think I would be doing it if I was still, if I'd still been healthy, and just kind of, taking a moment to take stock and basically just change my perspective on a lot of things.
Yeah, I think that's really inspirational when people don't let something bring them down and take on that challenge to enjoy life and try new things. Do you think that's what really gave you the kick to move to Hong Kong and completely change careers? Was that like the defining reason? You looking back, what made you make that change?
Yeah, that is a really good question. There was a very big part of the fact that I hadn't accepted the fact that I was ill. It was always about, when I'm well again, I will do X, Y, and Z. And when I'm better, I'll go back to my old life. And then there kind of came this point where I wasn't getting any better, and I realized that there was no going back to an old life. It was, you need to move forward. And I can either sit and dwell, and believe me, I dwelled a lot. It was incredibly hard. And whilst it's great to have a positive attitude, I don't want to sort of make light of the fact of, for anyone going through something similar, that it didn't come easily. But it was this, you know, I have a very supportive partner, and he was very keen to sort of make all my dreams come true. And I had this dream, and it was like, well, let's just try, you know, what's the worst thing that can happen? You know, it already felt like the worst thing had happened. And I was so stuck in this box of working in I was working for a large bank at the time, and, you know, what my paycheck looked like, and what I looked like to the outside world. And when something happens to your health, you realize that none of that stuff is important. And, you know, I thought I was so important at work. I was like, oh, yes, but I'm very, very important. And to be very honest with you, I was completely replaceable, which I was. You know, the bank hasn't stopped working because I don't work there anymore. And that was very humbling. And it kind of creates a sense of, I guess, not over planning, you know, because you never know what can happen, that health is the most important thing, and that you've got to keep your dreams alive no matter what happens, because that's the only thing that sort of keeps you going forward. And moving abroad was one of mine. So yeah, having the kind of illness definitely spurred that on, for sure.
Yeah, I think you raised a couple of really important points there, where people, you know, they maybe think that their work or all of this stuff is the be all and end all of life. I think that's changing, and these last few months have really opened people's eyes to that, compared to what it was before. And also the fear of failure a lot of the time holds people back. So the I think what you've done and how you've overcome stuff by, you know, taking a bit of risk, people find that when they're, you know, I find people say, oh, you were really brave to move over to Dubai, for example, at a young age. I was like, not really. I mean, I could have just gotten a plane back home 1 month later if I didn't like it. Like, try stuff out. People worry about what other people think, I think, far too much, when actually they're not really thinking about what you're doing at all. And it's better to try and fail and you know, do what you love and try. Most people who are successful have failed thousands and thousands of times, but, you know, at least they've done it, and at some point they do become successful. And you know, I think you're just an embodiment of that kind of, you know, that attitude and personality.
Thank you. That's really kind of you to say. Yeah, I think, you know, you really hit the nail on the head with this idea that we get so consumed with what people think of us, and you're absolutely right, nobody is thinking about us. And I think the more we can tell ourselves that, not in a derogatory way, like, oh, nobody cares about us, but it's just, people will say well done when you do something that seems good, and people will criticize you and, you know, point at you when you do something that doesn't seem that great, right? And that's fine, but it doesn't make a difference. Even if everybody in the world is laughing and pointing at you for a so-called failure, so what? You haven't got any other choice but to carry on. So if you just kind of like push those voices out, you'll probably utilize your time much better. And, you know, you talk about sort of failures. I'm a very big believer in the fact that actually failure doesn't exist, right? It's a myth. It's this word that we overuse, and this kind of fear that we have of this failure. But actually, if we eliminate the word failure entirely from our vocabulary, all we'll see is actually that there are just lessons learned, right? There's an opportunity in everything. There's something that we learn. And because we are constantly evolving as humans, what we wanted or the way that we perceive something originally might not be the same several years later. So honestly, I really think that anyone in this situation thinking about moving abroad or taking a risk with whatever it might be, the failure doesn't exist. Just go with it. You'll find some joy in the situation in one way or another.
Definitely. And yeah, those are inspirational words, Natasha. Thanks for sharing them. I want to just change tact a little bit. And I know you've been, you know, living there in Hong Kong for 3 years now. Since we're obviously on a property podcast, I just wanted to ask, have you thought about looking into property there and settling down?
Yeah, actually. I have definitely thought about buying a property, but very interestingly, the reason that I've never fully pursued it is because I'm not sure if I'm ever going to settle down, as you say. And I think that, so yeah, definitely looked at properties and potentially investing here. But I think one of the biggest challenges is that when you don't know how long you're going to be somewhere, you don't know, it's just hard to make that commitment, essentially. And it's such a big financial commitment, especially in Hong Kong. Property prices are very high, the spaces are very small. You've really got to think twice about it. And there are definitely moments where I think, oh gosh, for the price of one property in Hong Kong, you can buy two in sort of, the suburbs of London. And that's a real consideration. So that's always been quite a deterrent. And I personally have found that it's not that accessible for an individual who's a non-resident to purchase a property here, and there are extra stamp duty costs and things like that, so it hasn't ever materialized, unfortunately.
Okay, that's really interesting to hear, because there's a lot of comparables with Dubai, with expats as well, who are, it's a transient place as well, but people are tending to spend longer in the city, and people have those same kind of fears. If I'm not going to be staying for long, how long am I going to be in the country? Should I invest in the property? So yeah, it's interesting to hear that that's also the same case in Hong Kong. But I think, like you said, there are some, there's more initiatives here in Dubai to encourage, expats to invest rather than charging them extra, for example, on stamp duty. But it's interesting. We do have a lot of people looking to move from places like Hong Kong, for example, just because of the price point. Like you were saying, the prices in Hong Kong are quite expensive, aren't they, per square foot, and in most other major cities. So Dubai, in comparison, has been quite attractive for people looking to live somewhere, especially like high net worth individuals.
So maybe you and I should have a conversation, Lloyd. We should revisit that.
But as if you want to move over here.
Why not? Take the risk, no fear.
Speaking of of Hong Kong, how has this COVID pandemic really affected the city?
Oh, it's difficult. It's difficult everywhere, isn't it? It's a completely unprecedented situation. But I'll tell you something, the people of Hong Kong are incredibly resilient. I'm so impressed by them in every way. When the COVID, obviously we were one of the first places where the sort of risk sort of came out. And from the moment it did, everyone just seemed to know what to do. Everyone was incredibly respectful. Everyone was very considerate. Everyone was wearing masks. Mm-hmm. We social distanced as much as possible without being told. People stayed indoors. And I think that sense of community has really helped Hong Kong in terms of keeping our numbers compared to a lot of other places down. And I really respect the people of Hong Kong for having that be the situation. So there's never been a sort of official lockdown, like lots of, obviously schools have closed and lots of businesses have closed, and it's been very difficult. There's no doubt about it. But as a sort of semi-outsider or someone looking at it from a bird's eye view, I think we've dealt with the situation as best as possible. There's always things to learn from. There have been mistakes that have been made. I'm sure there are people who feel like the government could have done more, but overall, I think we're in a better situation than a lot of other countries. So we're going with it, I guess, and see what happens.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. And it seems like they've dealt with the situation really well over there. Because I was unsure how they deal with the situation, considering the social unrest that we'd been seeing last year, especially. But it seems like all the citizens, like you said, the kind of team spirit of the city, everyone's got on board with it. Were you finding that surprising to see like everyone was, listening to what the government was saying, considering they'd been at odds with each other just, 6 months before?
I think, it's a really good question. My personal perception is that a lot of what has saved Hong Kong in terms of having much lower numbers is not necessarily because the government told us what to do and we did it. It was everyone took their own personal responsibility in the situation. I think it came from the people of Hong Kong. And so I think actually the government have been really lucky in how sensible Hong Kong has been as a community. Yeah, obviously, you know, look, the social unrest, look, it's still there. It hasn't gone away. It maybe died down slightly, but that kind of frustration and the underlying problems haven't gone away. And there is a very big potential for it to come back as soon as Hong Kong fully opens up again, because people are fighting to be heard, right? And I think this is the case wherever you might be. People want to be heard. And when they feel like they aren't being heard, it's incredibly frustrating. And, you know, conversely for the government, there's, as with all governments, there are things that are happening behind closed doors that we as the general public will never have full access to. So that kind of lack of communication makes for a very unpleasant situation. You know, it's very much like a child and parent situation where the parent, you know, as a grown-up, they have so much more information and understanding of the world perhaps, but if you don't explain it to your child, or you don't listen to your child in a way that works for them, you're going to have this kind of upheaval. So, you know, no one can say what's going to happen. It was very difficult last year for a lot of people, and the atmosphere in Hong Kong has definitely changed. But like I said, it's a very resilient place, and I continue to be impressed by what everyone is doing. And I say it in that way because it would be ignorant of me to sort of disregard the fact that I have a privilege, right? As an expat, I have a privilege in that I can leave at any point that I want, and I don't want to ignore that fact. So a lot of what I'm saying is very much from an expat's point of view. I can't speak for the people of Hong Kong who are born here and brought up here and who are going to stay, you know, for a lifetime here.
That's an interesting insight, because it would be interesting to speak to someone who's a you know, a national of Hong Kong, and what their kind of opinion was on that also. In Hong Kong, I know you've been doing a lot of work as an actress and a director, and you were talking about working in a bank before. I know you did a law degree. How did it come about that you just completely decided to change tact and move into the acting industry?
Yeah, I think my parents would like to know that too. No, I'm kidding. They're very supportive. You know, look, I think, and I touched on this before, we are evolving as humans. I don't believe that a decision that was made at the age of 16 years old is going to necessarily be correct for me at the age of 31. And I'm very aware of that. So I think it's fine for us to change our minds and dip in and out of things. I also think that we are part of a generation where we will have several careers in our lifetime. You know, our parents' generation, perhaps, they would work in one company and they work their way up, and that was very sort of normal for them. Whereas I think that our generation, the next generation, is going to come in and out of things that they like as they evolve. And for me personally, you know, I have always loved theatre. I've been involved in theatre and acting from quite a young age, but never sort of seriously. And when I came to Hong Kong, it was a combination of, well, this dream of moving abroad has come true. What other dream can come true? And it felt like the right time to take that risk, especially because I had had some health problems and I wasn't keen on going back to a corporate environment. It just wasn't for me. So I wanted to try and pursue acting because I love it. And I knew that there would always be potential risk of it not working out. Of course, you know, I'm not trained as such. I'm basing all on experience I've had. But what was the worst thing that was going to happen? You know, I'd already been in this situation where I had to quit something I loved previously. So I went for it and I started networking. I started meeting people. I paid my dues, you know, I really did when I first got here. And there are times when you definitely stop and think, gosh, you know, why am I doing this? This is really hard and it's not stable and it's not consistent. But then I remind myself that there were times when I worked in an office sort of 9 to 5, wishing that I could have a freelancer life. So, you know, the grass is always greener. And I think you have to constantly ask yourself, like I said earlier, why you're doing what you're doing. And if it still feels right, then you keep going and know that feelings of discomfort are just part of the process. So yeah, that's why I decided to pursue acting.
Okay, yeah, no, it is really interesting, and I see so many parallels with like my line of work in real estate. There there's ups and downs. You sometimes question what you're doing. There's big highs and lows as well. And we touched on failing and saying we should eradicate that word and just make it a learning experience. But there is a lot of failure as well in the acting industry through auditions and stuff like that. How have you been able to keep the positive mindset and deal with it so that you can keep moving forward?
Yeah, really good question, and a really good parallel that you've drawn, Lloyd, is that you just very much, I imagine, as you guys try to sell properties and sometimes it doesn't work out, is that we go on auditions as actors all of the time, and when you get that rejection, it feels incredibly personal, right? Because it's such a face-to-face job. And a really good question, how you stay positive. I'm not going to lie to you, there have definitely been some tears, but you know what, that's okay. That's part of the process. I think the biggest thing is experience, right? The first few times you get rejection, it's going to feel rubbish. Of course it is. But the more you experience it, the more resilience you build and the more you realize that actually it's not at all personal, right? Which is what brings me to my next point, in that detachment is very important, right? It actually isn't about you. When I go on an audition, if I am rejected, it's not because I'm the worst actor in the world and nobody wants to employ me. It's just maybe I don't look the right part. Maybe I don't look the right age of the character they're looking for. Maybe I'm the wrong gender. I don't know. Like, there are so many things, and actually it isn't about me specifically. It's just about what they're looking for. And I think it must be very similar in the kind of real estate business, where if somebody is looking to buy a property and they say no, it's not necessarily because you're not a good agent, it's because actually it's a huge financial commitment and they've changed their mind, or they've changed the area in which they're looking at, or they've got some, I don't know, maybe they're getting divorced and finances have suddenly become much more difficult. It could be anything. And so keeping that level of detachment when you go to these things, I think, is very, very important.
Yeah, I think the parallels there are 100% correct. And yeah, the only way you can really improve is just make sure you have, like, for example, in our line of work, like the knowledge, the presentation, all of that stuff. If you've done that to 100%, and then it's still, there's so many other external factors that can be in play, then you can only do a certain amount as well as you can in the work. And if still they don't want to proceed, then there's nothing you can do about it, and you just have to kind of take it on the chin, because there's always someone else who's also looking at the same time. I know that we work kind of on a consultative basis with our clients, and we have to do presentations to people. Do you think there's some crossover with, like, techniques that actors use that could be used to help us?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the same way that you're selling properties, we are selling a character, and we've taken on in the hope that, you know, people will be able to sort of relate to us. And I think that one of the really big sort of techniques, as it were, is empathy. You know, as an actor, you're required to put yourself in the shoes of another person and really sell that story, right? So developing empathy in sales is really important too, because if you can understand where your client is coming from, you're going to be able to relate to them much better. And that rapport, I think, is really important. And one of the best ways to do this is by actively listening. You know, there are a lot of people I'm sure in your business and definitely in my line of work, where you can tell, for example, when somebody's on stage and they've learnt their lines and they're doing a great job, but they're just there for themselves, right? They're not listening to their fellow actors. They're not reacting to their fellow actors. They're just doing a sort of their own thing in a quite selfish way. And I think it's the same for sales, that you need to be listening to what it is that your client really wants to better understand their needs. And then you're able to present your properties in a way that speaks to them personally. So, you know, by asking questions, really important, take the time to get them to know them. You know, I think feeling like you're being invested in is such a nice feeling for somebody who's about to invest a lot of money. So I highly recommend that. And, you know, when you're listening to their requirements, ask yourself why they are asking for those things, right? The more you ask why, the better in tune you will be with their needs. So I think that's something that's really key. Another sort of technique is facial expressions and hand gestures. I know it sounds like a really simple thing, but if you're on a viewing with somebody, or you're having kind of a consultation with someone, and you're sitting there with kind of a sour face, or you've got really aggressive hand gestures, you're going to turn somebody off quite quickly. And that kind of stuff is quite difficult not to take personally, because it probably is, when you're just kind of having an initial conversation. So you want to avoid people becoming disengaged. So, it doesn't hurt to smile, and just sort of, being interactive with them. I think that's really key. Another thing I'd say is, sorry,
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, really, especially with the active listening. I think that's the most important part, honestly, Tash, because as soon as you start learning what their requirements are and what their main drivers for purchasing a property and what they're looking for out of that property, as soon as you have that, then you can find that property that really suits what they're looking for. And on the flip side, that I'm talking more of an end user. If you're looking for an investor, then again, what's driving them? Is it the numbers? Is it the long-term plan for a really good location? And until you really understand that, you can never really provide the right solution that fits exactly what they're looking for.
Totally. I think there's also a really big part of needing to kind of be authentic. I think that's really important. I think people can get very distracted by what other people are doing in their industry, and that's what it is. It's a distraction, and it's not going to help you. So I think the more authentic you can be in your own ways and what you're selling, I think that's really key as well.
100%, definitely. That's 100% true. It kind of leads me also into a top 5, a segment that I do on this podcast regularly with all the guests. Since you're an actor, I wanted to ask, we do a lot of social media now in our profession, and it's become a key marketing tool, but a lot of people are not really confident being in front of a camera when presenting. Can you give like 5 basic tips that, I know you've already given a few, but can you give some tips for people looking to become more confident talking in front of a camera and look better when they're making videos?
Yeah, look better. I'm sure they all look beautiful anyway, but look, number 1, you've got to keep practicing. You have got to keep putting yourself in front of the camera, because that's the only way to get comfortable with it. The first few times, I remember I don't remember my first vlog. I think I must have recorded it about 24 times, because I was so nervous, and I was like scratching my nails or doing something silly all the time. But that's why you practice, right? You've got to be practicing. And if you're not comfortable in just doing it in a one take, don't put that pressure on yourself. Take as many takes as it takes. Oh gosh, awfully articulated, but keep doing it until you feel really comfortable with it. The second thing I would say is, don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's okay that not everything is perfect. There are times where I've been so focused on trying to make things perfect, and I never ever get the content out there, and it's just really silly. So it doesn't matter if you make mistakes. That's how you're going to learn. Once you've made the mistakes, you can learn from them. And also, sometimes when you make mistakes, it just makes you more relatable, which can work to your advantage. So definitely don't be afraid to make mistakes. Number 3, I've kind of already touched on this, but I would really tell people to be authentic. People can tell when you are regurgitating information or trying to imitate somebody else's style. But the most success you're going to have is when you're being your true self. And it's also what's going to ensure you have consistency in your deliverables. So definitely to try and be as authentic as possible. The next thing I'd say is really try and be concise. People, in my experience, have very short attention spans. So you want to, if you've got something that's going to take 15 minutes to say, find a way to say it in 5. Keep it short and sweet. And then, how many is that? That's 4. Okay, 5. Okay, so I can't count, but speak clearly and slowly. If your audience can't understand what you're saying, then there's no point in what you're doing. And it sounds like a very simple tip, but actually you'd be surprised how fast people end up speaking and inarticulate they are because they're nervous. So just kind of slow it down, and just overall make sure that you're somewhere where you're comfortable, that there are no distractions, there are no loud noises, and that you always look presentable, and it never hurts to just check your teeth. Nobody needs to know what you had for lunch. So those would be my main tips.
That's really useful, Tash, and I think those are some really informative things for people looking to start out on videos or looking to improve the content that they're putting out. You mentioned talking slowly and articulating. A lot of people, maybe it's not their first language, if they're, say, doing a video in English, or they speak really quickly because it's not their native tongue. Do you recommend people take speech classes?
I mean, look, I think that self-development is a great thing. And I think that if people are keen to improve their communication skills because they feel perhaps a little insecure about it, then it's definitely worth pursuing. Yeah, for sure. I think that there are a lot of things that you can do on your own at home. But if you're also somebody who needs kind of a little extra push, you need some guidance, then yeah, absolutely. I think self-development's really great.
Okay, great. And one more thing I wanted to ask you actually is I know you're doing a new initiative at the moment with this Unwind with Natasha, and you're using some of your acting methods. Why don't you explain to people what it is and how you're helping people with anxiety and de-stressing at the moment?
Sure. So look, with everything that's going on in the world, there's definitely one of the biggest themes that I was kind of seeing across people I was speaking to was a sense of anxiety and, confinement and just feeling very stressed and uncertain about the future. So I basically wanted to create something that was fun and relatable and that people could do from home. So the idea behind these sessions that I've created is to help people to de-stress and unwind and essentially energize you, all of which I really believe are essential for developing emotional resilience, which is often the reason that we end up feeling, anxious and unhappy and things like that, is because we don't have that kind of emotional resilience. So I wanted to focus on that. And a really key way of doing this is by using our imagination. It's such an underutilized tool, and somebody who has found such benefit in it, by using our imagination as actors. I wanted to sort of, I guess, pass that skill on. So I use fun and playful theatre techniques to tap into people's imagination and kind of get them outside of their own head and hopefully left with this kind of feeling of catharsis. And drama techniques are renowned for providing this sense of emotional release. So I'm drawing on my experience as an actor to guide people through these sessions, and hopefully they feel a lot better afterwards and better prepared for the days ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a great initiative that you're doing and really helpful to a lot of people. Why don't you share out the social media handles, YouTube channel, etc., where people can find you on so that they can take part?
Sure. So my Instagram handle is JAINEY JAIN, so Janie Jane. My email address is N for November, V for Victor, JAIN15@gmail.com. So you can contact me if you're interested in any of these sessions. And my YouTube channel is youtube.com/Tash Talks. So all very different things, but they work for me, so why not?
Okay, if you're watching on YouTube, I'll make sure that's in the description below. And I just want to thank you for your time, Natasha. Thanks for coming on. It's been really great to have you.
No, you're so welcome, Lloyd. This has been so much fun, and thank you for inviting me on here. It's been really lovely.
No problem. And thanks for listening or watching on whichever platform you're using. And check out the next episode of Realtor Talk when it comes out. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.